At the same time, Rohan was again invaded from the east, and the Dunlendings, seeing their chance, came over the Isen and down from Isengard. It was soon known that Wulf was their leader. They were in great force, for they were joined by enemies of Gondor that landed in the mouths of Lefnui and Isen. Hey everyone, Yoistin here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we will be discussing the War of the Rohirrim and Dunlendings in preparation for the War of the Rohirrim anime movie coming out later this year. Related sources are in the description and cards, so please check those out. My friends, thank you all for joining me today. Let's begin our tale. Looking first at the forces arrayed in this war, we have little in terms of specific numbers to go off of, but we may make some pretty accurate assumptions, I think. The War of the Rohirrim and Dunlendings, which mostly took place in 2758 to 2759 of the Third Age, was an all-out war primarily between two factions, with some intervention from a third. Therefore, I expect that, since this was a full-scale invasion of Rohan, every fighting man of Rohan and all those that the Dunlendings could and would spare were engaged in this, making their forces number at least in the tens or hundreds of thousands on each side, which is usually a safe bet for the populations of nations in Middle-earth, since it is a medieval fantasy, thus likely reflecting many of our own populations that we had in different nations at that time. Now, as for the third faction that also took part, that would be the Easterlings, who likely were also keeping some or a lot of their forces behind in the east, and or for potential future fights with Gondor. I doubt that they would spare every fighting man they had to offer for something like this that was very far away from their borders. Now, like the quote said, more enemies of Gondor landed at the mouths of some of the rivers in the south, but it seems that their eyes were actually turned far more towards Gondor at this time, so we won't really mention them much. Concerning the known commanders on both sides, we have Wulf, the leader of the Dunlendings, being the really only known commander on the side of the Dunlendings and Easterlings both, while we have King Helm Hammerhand, his sons Haleth and Hama, and his nephew Freyolf. This war, while it certainly had preluding conflicts and skirmishes between these people, it was immense in its scale, and honestly was very explosive as well, for so many people to fight, so many to die, all within a year or so of time, and during an extreme weather event in Middle-earth. It stands alone as a war amongst many of the conflicts of Middle-earth for many reasons. So let's dive into it. Now keep in mind that the events of the lore here will be the main events to take place in the War of the Rohirrim anime movie, so keep that in mind as we go through this, as this is what is going to be adapted. The prelude of this war is made up of the events that took place within the few hundred years before the war. There was always a great deal of tension between the Rohirrim and the Dunlendings, for as long as Rohan had been a country of the men formerly known as Eotheid. It is not as simple as this being a tale of colonialism, one country taking over another, for such tales are never so simple in Tolkien's works. Nor is this a tale of barbarians who were mindless coming to fight the Rohirrim. No, it's far more complicated than that. After Eorl the Young and his men helped free Gondor from the invading Easterlings, they were of course granted the land of Kelenarthon to dwell in as Rohan, despite the men being named Dunlendings already having lived there. Yet even if these men had been there before the Rohirrim, they actually did little to aid Gondor, who had claimed this land in their early years when these men had been Númenóreans. So again, this goes far, far back even into the Second Age. The Dunlendings did not hold the land against the invaders of Gondor, particularly the Easterlings from out of the northeast, and as we will see in this war, they would even aid such invaders and find common cause with them. Gondor certainly did not appreciate this. Therefore, the land was given by Gondor to what would become Rohan, as they had proven themselves formidable allies, and would also hold the land against the enemies of Gondor. As one might expect, this caused a massive divide between the peoples of the Dunlendings, who had lived there longer, and the Rohirrim, who had come with the permission and gift of Gondor. These tensions led to smaller conflicts for sure, as well as the need for Dunlendings to establish themselves more in the lands west of the river Isen, into Dunland, Enedwaith, but as well as Isengard too, which they would eventually take by the time that the war started. Indeed, Helm's grandfather himself would fight against the Dunlendings, but not at the scale of what we will discuss here today. Now comes the war itself, which was truly started in a horrible political situation turned violent. Since I have described the situation in more detail in my Helm Hammerhand video, I'll link that as well. But ultimately, the Dunlending named Freka, who led his folk, came to a council in Edoras, and he attempted to intimidate King Helm to let Freka's son Wulf marry Helm's daughter. Now this daughter, though unnamed in the books, is likely to play a far larger role in the movie based on recently released pictures, since she has no more lore beyond this mention. Now, the two men, Helm and Freka, exchanged insults, leading to a duel outside, and Helm would strike Freka with his fist once, killing him in such a blow, earning the title Hammerhand. The Dunlendings would not abide the brutal killing of their leader, and took some time to prepare an all-out invasion of Rohan, even as the followers of Freka were named enemies of Rohan, deepening that political divide. This happened in 2754. And 4 years later, in 2758, a great invasion, planned and coordinated with other enemy factions against the west, commenced. Gondor, Rohan's only true ally, would be attacked by corsairs, disallowing them from aiding Rohan, while the Dunlendings invaded Rohan from the west, and the Easterlings invaded from the east. Helm himself would go forth to defend his land from those people beyond the Isen River and Isengard, much like Theodred would against the forces of Saruman centuries later. Yet, also like Saruman would, Wulf would defeat Helm and push him back from the northwest into the fortress of the Hornburg to hold a defensive position in a siege, while Wulf pressed on to Edoras, and would likely meet up with the Easterlings there. Now, in the pictures released for the upcoming movie, a Mumuk is depicted outside of Edoras. Technically, the Olifants of the south belonged not to those of the east, but the Haradrim. Yet, I imagine that they'll probably just bring in the Haradrim into the Easterling army as well. This battle for Edoras would happen in 2758 of the Third Age, and Helm's son and heir Halath, who was left in Edoras by his father, would command the defense of the city, and he would lose. The Dunlendings, and likely their allies from the east, would break in and slay Halath, and Wulf would sit upon the seat of the king, taking the Golden Hall as snow fell on Rohan, beginning the long winter. Yet other Rohirrim who had escaped to Dunharrow either before or during the battle would survive, being led by the nephew of Helm Hammerhand, Freyalaf. They would face the winter in the mountain pass. The next year, 2759 of the Third Age came, while snow and ice froze the lands of Rohan, and a great famine would also take hold. Helm and his men in the Hornburg grew weak and weary, but they did not surrender, not even when Hama, Helm's other son and heir, fell defending the Hornburg, much like the Hama did during the days of Theoden King. But Helm grew gaunt and terrible, dressing in white furs to blend in with the snows, and like a snow troll would sneak out and slay his enemies in their camps with his bare hands. He sounded his horn each time before he went, and the valley that the Hornburg was in would become known as Helm's Deep for that terror. The sound of his horn, and even tell of it, and Helm himself, would horrify Dunlendings for centuries to come. But one night, the winds blew quite cold, and Helm did not return. In the morning his body was found frozen upright in the snows. For the men of Rohan, it seemed all was lost. Yet hope remained, and as the snows melted, there was yet one who could take back the lands of the Horse Lords and restore the line of Eorl. Freyalaf, who took refuge in Dunharrow, would ride with his men when spring finally came that year, assaulting Edoras from the south, and he would slay Wulf and scatter the Dunlending forces, before ridding all the lands of the Mark, of Dunlendings and Easterlings, and anyone else who might threaten the Uorlingus. The king would be buried outside of Edoras with his ancestors, and as the first direct line of kings in Rohan ended, a new one began that would also end with Theoden King himself. In the aftermath of the war, a new ally presented himself as a way to take control of Isengard away from the Dunlendings. For at the coronation of Freyalaf, Saruman the White came unbidden, and offered his friendship and alliance to a now restabilizing Rohan, which was heartily accepted by Freyalaf, who advised the wizard to seek the Steward Baron of Gondor for the keys to Orthanc. For even though the Dunlendings had taken the ring of Isengard, they could never enter the tower. At the time, this made Rohan far safer, as Saruman would prove a valuable ally for some time, but would also prove to be the beginnings of another disaster for Rohan, particularly at the hands of Uruk-hai and of course Dunlendings, who leveraged the War of the Ring in an attempt to revenge themselves upon the Rohirrim for this particular war, as well as so many other conflicts. And so, my friends, we come to the end of our tale on the War of the Rohirrim and Dunlendings. From this tale, we see that no one is blameless in war, and we must look to not provoke others, even as we defend ourselves and our own honor. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts on this war and the upcoming movie in the comments below. If you did like this video, please hit that like button and share this with a friend. I'm quite excited for this new anime film and what is to come there, and honestly, it's going to be quite fascinating to see how they translate this story in particular. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider getting some candles from our friends Mythologie Candles, or order some Weta or United Cutlery Lord of the Rings swords, statues, and other replicas from Castle Kon, who does international shipping, and use the code WEST at checkout, and please check out our merch and Patreon. Also, please check out Zwood and their wood-carved maps and clocks, and use the code in the description for 15% off at checkout. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons and YouTube members who make all of this possible: Peter Shepard, John Hume, Reese Jenkins, Arthur Merlin, Theodore, Moonviper, Andrew Carlisle, and Zoomi. Thank you so much, I really appreciate the support. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today, and I'll see you all again next week with a video on how the elves could have beaten Morgoth without the Valar. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.